So this is a little story. So the last so I started working on Joomla when I was in 2001, which is when it was still called Mambo. This is when I found Mambo, and I started making my first contributions. And like I explained yesterday, one of the first contributions was actually to implement a little bit of an improvement to what was the menu system, because in Mambo times, there was not even a menu manager in Mambo. Right now in Joomla, you have a menu manager, you can create menus, and you can link them to components, and you can settings, and all of that. That didn't exist. The only thing that you could do in the very beginning was you could make a list of items, and you could link them to a component, and you had to type the URL for the component yourself. That was it. So the very first contribution that I made was actually the ability to have nested menu items. We actually came a long way. The menu manager in Joomla's case is the core of the architecture of Joomla. Most people don't really get that, but it's also the big differentiator. It's what makes Joomla 100% different from Drupal or WordPress. WordPress has never really had menu management in the beginning, still has very limited menu management, because everything basically works through a post that you make, and then you embed shortcodes that are going to create functionality from there. In Joomla, you actually link to a component, which is very different from what WordPress does, and it's also different from what Drupal does. In Drupal, everything is a node ID, as a node ID, which is what you're linking to. So similar to the item ID concept in Joomla. That, in a sense, makes the Joomla architecture also very powerful. Why? Because compared with WordPress, in WordPress, everything is always loaded. WordPress loads all the plugins that you install into it for every page request, which basically means the more plugins, the slower it gets. Joomla doesn't do that. Joomla will dispatch, it's called, to a specific component. The only thing that Joomla always loads is the system plugins. The more system plugins you have, the slower your site could become, because they do all sorts of tasks for each request. All the other stuff is loaded on demand. It's lazy loaded. It's only loaded when required. That approach is called a front controller. So you have something in Joomla that decides where in the request needs to be fired to and what needs to get loaded. That makes Joomla much more, and I was excited to explain that yesterday, it makes Joomla much more into a web application platform than a CMS or a blogging platform. Compared to WordPress, the content component, that's WordPress. In the content component, you have things like content plugins that allow you to render your article and do stuff with it. Like, for example, load a module in an article through a little tag you put in. That's a shortcode. Basically, we had WordPress in Joomla already for 15 years. We just didn't really evolve Joomla around content. We evolved Joomla around the idea that you could create your own components that could be dispatched separately. In an ideal world, and this would have been where I would have taken Joomla, and it's going on video so people can show it, is that you would take out most of the core components out of Joomla. You don't need those. The only things you need are the menu manager, the installer, the user manager, and you could argue that you might want the template manager too. All the rest is overhead. You want to reinstall those if you want to create a CMS. But if you want to create a social network with, let's say, one of the social networking plugins, the extensions that Joomla has, you don't need content in most cases. There are really good replacements for content in the market. If you want to create a document management application, you don't need content. You just need Docman, like what we're building, or any of the other document managers. So that makes Joomla very different from WordPress. And it's also where I trying to evolve Joomla, right? So this is a very famous Einstein quote, right? Any fool can make something really complex. It takes a little bit of genius and brilliance to make something simple. So the goal should always be to take the complexity out and make it more simple. I'll go fast through all of this. A little story about the web. See, what a lot of developers forget is where they're coming from. They only see where we are now, and then they want to discuss all the pros and cons and the differences of all the technologies that we're using. without forgetting how we actually got here in the first place. Understanding that is important because it allows you to understand what choices have already been made and where you want to go from there. And sometimes it also helps you to understand where you want to go back to. So in the beginning, there was only HTML. Everything was HTML, and I called it the HTML-olytic area, right? It was static pages, and the static pages were uniquely identified by a URL, a unique resource locator. So in 1991, we started doing this. The web was born, and the first web page was published, and this is the first web page. You can still find it. This was written in HTML2. Go to the page, open it up, and you will find some very weird HTML. It looks really weird. It doesn't have end tags. It's in capitals. It still works, by the way. Every browser can still render HTML2. So HTML markup language is a very important part of how we publish websites. Everything starts with HTML. Without HTML, no websites. The thing with HTML was that we were putting everything together into like one kind of blob of stuff, and that didn't really work. This is how HTML2 looked. So if you take an HTML2 document, then you have, if you can read it here, you have head getting started with HTML2, and this is UL and a list with 5 links to 5 articles. Now, this is really great. It's a single file. It's not dynamic, static. It's not separated because I have everything together. It doesn't use a data source or a database. You can copy paste this. It's really great. You can put it on Stack Overflow and say, hey, this is HTML2. You can copy it. It's cacheable out of the box because it's pure HTML and it's static, and it doesn't have an item ID. Yay. We added those later. This was the first step, the static publishing area. We would take our Dreamweavers or front pages or our text editors, and we would write some HTML and we would publish it, which was great. It was great until it was not so great anymore because we wanted to give other people the ability to change our sites, their own sites, without having technical knowledge. So we needed something more smart and more dynamic. So here we are, the dynamolytic area. It is when web publishing took a next step and evolved from a single flat file into creating and generating a page from data coming from different sources, which made web publishing a lot easier because the data was added to a database, and then we could read it from the database and generate the page. So for that, we needed something called PHP. And PHP was announced in 1995. It was actually called PHPFI. PHP stands for Personal Homepage Tools. I'm sure you knew that, but that's the original name of PHP. Originally, PHP was something very simple. It was a CGI interface to programs written in C, so you could maintain your own personal homepage. That was the idea, right? The idea was that we have all this functionality in C in Linux that we want to make available, but it's too hard for people to write C, so we're going to create this like little wrapper around it. Okay, so this is original PHP. So PHP originally was something like this. You had like an include statement for a file. You can get an environment variable, in this case HTTP user agent. This is an if. This is an end if with an exit, and then there's some variables defined here. So this is very early PHP. Like Rasmus wrote, I don't know how to stop it. There was never any intent to write a programming language. I have absolutely no idea how to write a programming language. I just kept adding the next logical step along the way. So the development kind of started to form a team around it in 1997, and this is where PHP started to evolve in PHP 3 and PHP 4, and it took off. But initially, it was kind of like a templating language. It was a little bit of instructions to make it very easy to create dynamic HTML. That was it. Like all the rest, like the huge ecosystem that we have today, where people create like very big programs in a programming language, which is really became a really capable programming language. PHP 8.1 is a very, very capable programming language that I'm enjoying working in quite a lot. It's actually since PHP 8 that that I'm going like, I have the same kind of feel writing code that I could have when I wrote C or C++ code earlier. So PHP went to PHP Hypertext Preprocessor, then changed the name a little bit. PHP 3 development began, launched in 1998, which was only 3 years. Well, Joomla Mambo was built on that. It was only 3 years before I got the Mambo project started in 2001, right? 3 years before that. Okay, so next step. PHP and MySQL combined delivers us a dynamic page. This is a dynamic page. And this is how we did it in PHP 3 times. So we were mixing everything up. So we made a connections to MySQL, we loaded some data in, we threw a query in there, got the data, we outputted the list. This is actually still the same thing I'm doing. I'm rendering 5 links, freeing the result, and closing the connection. All in one file. That's great. That's great. That works. I get dynamic data, I can render it. Single file. It's dynamic now. It comes from a single data source. In this case, MySQL. You can still copy paste it and throw it on Stack Overflow. It's cacheable? Nah, not really. You know, it's cacheable to a point because this data always changes, so I cannot really cache it anymore. But what if somebody makes an edit to the data? Then how am I going to know that the data is still cacheable? So the answer to that was, let's forget about caching. Caching we're not going to do anymore. This is just going to be dynamic. Each time we fire off a request to this URL, this whole thing will execute again, which is an enormous waste of resources. But the web was slow and people didn't expect it to be super fast, so no problem. And we still didn't have an item ID, which is still great. Next step. I call this the web public olytic area. This is the point where the internet has been established, individuals and businesses all over the world who are clamoring to get a website online, and this led to the natural evolution of web publishing systems. So we went from mixing a little bit of dynamic information with a little bit of HTML, publishing an article, to bringing it all together and creating a web publishing system. Meet Joomla. Or better yet, meet Mambo. 2002, Mambo open source was launched as a system of publishing online. We never call this a CMS. Mambo never had the title Mambo CMS. It was actually called Mambo Site Server, which was the official original name. This is also, and then later on we call it MOS, which is Mambo open source, but it was called Mambo Site Server. The whole idea was that you were serving a site. You were not really worried about the idea of CMS that didn't really exist yet at that point. So this is a little bit of history. Version 3 of Mambo, and that was the most important one, version 3.0, the open source Mambo site server becomes Mambo open source because there was a difference made between the commercial product, which was still made available by Miro, implemented for their customers, and Mambo site server, which became Mambo open source, commonly referred to as MOS. Robert Castley became the project director of Mambo open source by the end of 2002, and this is where the whole open source movement around Mambo and Joomla started. So the first version that was released as open source was the 4.0 version. The last version of Mambo that we worked on was 4.5.1.2 or 1.12. Still the same thing, a list of 5 links. This is the web links component in Mambo 4.5 that does nothing more than render 5 links. The links are coming from the database. So what is happening here is now suddenly I have a class called HTML web links, and I have something called display list. This is going to display the list of those 5 web links. And I'm getting a form together because there is pagination that works through a form, so I need to put a form in. I'm rendering a table because the whole thing was still not tableless. We're talking 2002. We're rendering a table here. We're getting data from somewhere, which isn't really clear because it's coming in this function as a list of categories and then a list of rows. And then we have some helper functions here that are part of this web links component that help us render it. We have something called show image to show the image of the web link. We have something called show table to render the table. And we have something called show categories to render the list of categories below that, so we can switch to additional categories that might exist. We were rendering a back button, the famous back button that Mambo had, if you still remember. Instead of like having a browser back button, there was actually also a back button rendered in the page itself. It took quite a lot of years before people got used to the fact that it was not there anymore. People kept asking, like, where did the back button go? It's in your browser bar. So these are all the features that this has. It's no single file anymore. This is just one of many files. The component was put together out of, I think, 10 or 15 files at that time. You had a file to render it. You had a little bit of templating. You had files with code in there to handle the helper methods. It was dynamic. It separated logic. It was not one file anymore that mixed database queries with rendering. The database queries are in a different file. I think it was called database or model already. I'm not really sure. But there are multiple files, one file to fetch the data, one to actually render it. This is the rendering part. You can still copy paste it, but you had to zip it together. These are actually, oh yeah, I forgot. These are all the files. It was called weblinks class, weblinks HTML, and weblinks PHP. That one is just a placeholder. So those three. The database is fetched here. This is the one we're looking at, and this is the entry file for the component. You can still copy paste it, but you had to zip it up. It's actually not possible anymore with Joomla extensions. Originally, you could zip this up, send it to somebody, and he would unzip it in the components folder, and it would just work. If there's a database table to be added, he had also to create the database table. But originally, a lot of components actually didn't use database tables, so they just worked. It's not cacheable, same problem. Data can change, so we're not going to cache it. And it doesn't have an item ID. Yay. And then this happened. In Mambo 4, we introduced the idea of a menu manager. The menu manager in Mambo 4 was, and this is a screenshot from going back to 2004, right? This was very simple. You could select a component and create a link to it. You had different options. You could link to a content category. Like some components allowed you to link to subparts. So you could link to a content category. You could link to a blog category. You could link to a content section. But all the rest was into the MOS component. All other components that you would install, you could only create one link for. So one link to contact, one link to web links, one link to banners. You couldn't really say, I'm going to link to web links, and I want to show 5 web links from this category. That was not possible. Add menu item. Again, this is actually where Joomla Mambo starts to evolve into a web application platform and not into a content management system. This is the same thing in Mambo 4.5. This has extended a little bit, but it's still the same. So you can link to blog, which is the content component that we still have. Again, you can link to a component. Then you can create links to other components. You can create links to a component item, which is a single item, to a contact item, to a content item, a newsfeed, which is just a newsfeeds component, static content, which is just an HTML page that you have, a URL, and then this is a table. This is where we're starting to make a difference between how it's being rendered. This is rendered in a table. This is rendered as a block listing. So this is the initial start of templating and views and layouts, that idea. And then you have the famous wrapper, right, which just wraps an iframe around. Okay, cool. I'm getting somewhere, but then the next step is what I call the separatolytic area, which basically means that the whole goal and the whole problem was that we had to be able to separate the content from the data so that we could implement things like templates and layouts. So the system would handle fetching the data and would handle making it available, but template designers and developers wanted to give the site their own look and feel. So they wanted to create customize templates for customers. So those two parts had to be separated. And there was a lot of talk in the industry about separation of data and presentation. That's what happened. So we had an MVC design pattern that most were starting to use for that, separating the logic on the page from building the display of the page. And then in the next step, also being able to render that data in different formats. For example, an RSS feed. Joomla does that with a format parameter. You can say format is RSS, or format is HTML, or format is JSON. That's that idea. Data can be rendered in different formats. Joomla 2.1.5 released in 2008, which is our next step. So under the hood in Joomla, we did a lot of code reorganization and refactoring. There's a couple of interesting things related to this talk here. One of those is the format parameter and the fact that you could start to render data in different formats: Atom, RSS, PDF, and HTML. And the fact that internally components were now MVC based. They had a model, a view, and a controller. Going back, originally in Mambo you had this. You only had those 3 files, and this was all combined a little bit. There was no clear separation between those. This did data fetch and helpers, and this just rendered HTML in some way. There were no real templates. So we separated all that out. What we kind of did, well, actually deliberately did, we made Joomla restful, or we prepared it to be restful. Joomla, and this is something that Joomla, with all due respect for whoever built it, but whoever built the API in Joomla right now did it wrong. They don't understand how APIs and the web actually works. Joomla was restful out of the box, and is restful out of the box. It does that by having formats. You can go to a URL and have that URL rendered as RSS. That's a RESTful interface. Because I'm separating the actual entities, the actual resources, from their representation. That's a basic principle of REST. Atom, the same deal, but in 2008, REST and JSON wasn't the thing yet. It came later. But all the bases were there. So with a little bit of effort, in Joomla 1.5, you can take a URL and render a JSON representation of the data that it represents.
Maybe a few, but not eject data.
For sure.
Oh yeah.
Of course, because the injection of the data, the post, the put, and the get are being sent to the controller of the component, right? So this is why there were a limited set of actions in the component. The only thing that had to be done there in the next step, we refactored it further to be able to have a discrete get, put, post, and get. That's actually what the front controller Joomla should be doing, and then dispatching that specifically to the internal components. That's something that Pages does. So in Pages, you have a dispatcher that will take the request that comes in and will send it to an internal controller. They're actually, I will show in a bit, you don't write controllers anymore. Because the whole thing is completely RESTful. You don't need to worry about that part anymore. It just handles it for you. It's standardized. It's there. Handling post requests, validating data coming in, handling fetching IDs from it, handling validation of it, knowing that a post request it needs to do a return, knowing that a put request can only be put against the URL that already exists. All that is there.
Can I ask something? The HTTP protocol.
Yes.
Stateless.
Yes.
So if you want to have state, to synchronize state between the client and the server.
Right.
How do you do that?
Well, that's always a problem, right? So the only answer that PHP can give for that are sessions. Because the session can keep some sort of state, and then you need to have a session identifier to be able to recognize when a request comes back in. This is kind of how you authenticate. You keep state somewhere. But ideally, the whole thing is stateless, and and you don't have that problem. Another way of doing it is in REST, you would basically include an identifier to uniquely identify the user, and then send it with each URL. Yeah, but not in a cookie, but just in a header or in the URL. All right, so here we are. Joomla 1.5, still the same code, but this is the refactored one. So this is now our component. Right, so we went from three files to this. But it's completely separated. It's complete MVC. It has controllers, models, views, and then the controller itself here, which is the front controller, the router, the entry point. This is the template. Now we can create templates that are not in a PHP class anymore, which was Joomla Mambo 4.5. This is just a template. The data is being pushed into this template. The templating engine is called a push engine and not a pull engine. Pages is using a pull engine. I'll explain it in a bit. Data comes in here. You kind of need to know as a developer what the data is. You can introspect it, and then you can generate your HTML. In a sense, this brings us back closer again to how PHP was originally designed to be used. Because PHP was originally the idea of being able to dynamically generate HTML. We have to go through a lot of hoops and steps to do that, and we need to create quite a lot of code to make that happen. Which actually puts quite a lot of burden on the extension developer to understand how all that needs to work. And that was maybe in hindsight too much to ask for quite a lot of extension developers. So features, single file, it's not a single file anymore. All my files. It's dynamic, has separated logic, yay. Comes from a single data source, copy pasting it, partly. You need to zip it up, and even if you zip it up, it needs to get installed, and there's stuff that needs to happen to be able to make it work. It's non-cacheable. And unfortunately now, item IDs are becoming important. Why are item IDs important? Because an item ID recognizes the menu item in Joomla, and it's based on the item ID that the menu manager knows which additional settings it needs to load. Like this is metadata linked to the item ID. There is no going back from this, at least in the setup that Joomla uses. There are no item IDs anymore in Pages. I will show you how I solved that. So here we are, menu manager. Again, I keep talking about the menu manager because it's the most key part of Joomla. It's how Joomla works. And it makes it different from any other system. So you have the same link. We created a better user interface for it. You now can link to articles, contacts, login, newsfeeds, polls, search, web links, wrapper. You create an external link. You can have a separator, and you create an alias to an existing menu item.
Two questions about item ID. Why was it not called menu ID, and why does it have the uppercase I?
Because it was already in there as item ID in Mambo, so we couldn't really change it.
Why uppercase?
What?
Uppercase I?
Same reason. A lot of the original URL variables were uppercase, so the ones that we added ourselves were all lowercase, and there were a couple that we had to stick with, so those were uppercase. And the problem with item ID becoming lowercase gets solved when you start implementing routing. Yeah. The routing in 1.5 was intended to be a transition measure. The idea was, and this is why still in Joomla 4 you can turn Ceph off, that there is somebody that really did understood what the idea was. Like whoever decided that in Joomla 4 you still want to have Ceph be able to turn off doesn't really understand it, with all due respect. Like you shouldn't have two routing mechanisms anymore. Like you have routing, and it should always be on. The only thing that routing shouldn't do is being able to remove index.php because you need to turn HDXs on for that, which is a rewrite on Apache. But the routing in URL should be default all the time. Right now, Joomla still installs with that Ceph off, which is...
There are two ways. You have Ceph, and you have the HDXs.
Yeah, but I mean, is Ceph off when you install it?
It's on by default, but
it's off by default or not?
On.
That's good.
I find it it's on by default.
I'm not saying anything. It was off by default for quite a long time. So the idea was in 1.5, in 1.5 we had two routers. You had a non-Ceph router and we had a Ceph router. Why? Because you had to have backwards compatibility for sites that were not that were running without routed URLs. Otherwise, all the sites URLs would break, which would be a mess for SEO.
Also, I think that what Joomla is doing, and probably I shouldn't say that since we're recording, the canonical link on all Joomla sites, it's not the same URL.
No, yeah, that changed it, but that's a different.
But it's
I agree with that.
Content, it's that is the canonical.
Yeah.
Canonical is not the thing that you think.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah, the canonical is /component /content.
Because you have that as the default.
I agree. So anyway, so the short story of this is Ceph in 1.5 was built as a transition measure, and in 2.0 it should have been turned on by default, and the setting should have been removed. There shouldn't have been a non-Ceph routing anymore.
Actually, it's really quite helpful if you have to do user support on a website and you don't know which components it's on. If you turn it off, you can see the real com underscore or whatever component, so you know where to start.
So you turn on debug, and in your debug panel you show information about your environment. You know that's like this is sticking to legacy because it's convenient. This is one of the reasons that Joomla is going down and not going up. Right? As long as Joomla keeps sticking to this idea that legacy is good and we should hold on to it as much as possible, the less popular it will become. There is still wrapper and web links and context and all that stuff in Joomla. There is nobody using this anymore. The components are old, the functionality is old. None of that functionality matters. There are still modules and plugins in there that do things. Like there's still a mod wrapper in there. Maybe they took it out in 4, but see, it's still there. Like iframes are a thing of the past. It needs to go immediately. Well, by who?
By me.
Okay, so put it on the chat and make it installable. It doesn't need to be part of the core. But I will continue. The pageolytic area. So what happened is that this whole idea of MVC worked, but turned out that when the internet became faster, the dynamic page generation what Joomla does, is like server-side rendering, also became a little bit slow. So people started creating page generators and static site generators to solve that problem, where you're going to mix the concept of static publishing, writing your file yourself, with having a dynamic process doing that for you, but doing it not on demand, not just in time, but doing it beforehand. You're generating your pages, and then you're uploading them as static files. So dynamic page generators will allow you to display your content almost anyway. You're not longer doing HTML, RSS. Again, there you go. So in 2020, I started working on this in 2018, and then I announced it in 2020. I was like, I want to be able to go back to how PHP was originally intended to be used, and I want to be able to solve most, if not all, of the problems that the Joomla architecture provides for, based on ideas that I've had over the years. Mixing the idea of static site generators with server-side rendering. Is it possible to get the benefit of a static site generator and still server-side render in PHP, FPM, or PHP? So Pages is a page generator. It generates a single page. It just doesn't generate a site. It only generates a single page. It's inspired by ideas and concepts of flat file CMS systems like Graph and site generators like Jekyll. Didn't reinvent the wheel. I basically looked at how these guys are building their things and how they're naming things, how they're organizing stuff, and I used ideas from that. Pages is not a static site generator. Pages works dynamic, but it works dynamic, lazy, and smart. It knows about the content on the page. Pages are dynamically generated and cached. So you generate the page, you cache it, you only regenerate the page when the information on the page will change. Pages has a flat file bias. That basically means that it's not connected to any database by default. There is no requirement for a database. You can run it without a database. That also means, and this is also what I showed to Mark, and Mark has already been using, you can easily connect it to anything, like a database table, a headless CMS like Strapi, a web service like Airtable or Google Sheets. It has 4 built-in data sources, a database, the flat file, an HTTP, 3, and HTTP, which is a web service. So this is the same thing that I've been showing in all the different steps, but now built in Pages. There is only one file. This is it. There is a little bit of metadata here, which provide Pages with information about how this needs to be rendered. The title of the page, the route, which is the routing system, but instead of having Joomla take some control, Pages renders and takes control over the whole route. So this is the whole route. This is page to web links, .csv or JSON. So it can be page to web links, and then it will render HTML. If you do this .csv, then it will understand that .csv is also allowed, and it will render it as a CSV file. And if you do .json, then it will know that JSON is also allowed, and then it can render this as JSON API. It does it out of the box. So you don't need to write any templating or anything for that. This is the RESTless interface at work. Same URL can be rendered into a different representation because the entities, the data that is coming in is the same.
So without CSV or JSON at the end, we'll do HTML.
Exactly, using this template. So the question mark stands for that this is optional. This is the routing. The routing is explained in the wiki. It's really simple routing. It's not regex. However, if you want to have more advanced routing, you could start using regex in the route too.
What if you put PDF behind your URL? Will it just go back to the HTML default?
No, it will give a proper error. It will give a proper 404 page not found because RESTful wise that doesn't exist, so it cannot show it to you. So it doesn't do things like redirecting for you or all of that. It just basically says this URL doesn't exist, 404. The data is coming from the database. So you have this default database model that you can use. And then you just say table is web links. This works with single database tables. It doesn't work with joins and multiple database tables. Then you need to do a little bit of PHP code to do that. But if it's just a single database table, it can just fetch data from it. Then you define a filter. A filter, you define state, and in the state you can define a filter. In this case, I'd say the published column in the database needs to be 1. So it's automatically going to filter on that. There's a very advanced filtering system in here. You can do ORs and ANDs and XORs to basically come and decide what kind of data that you want to come back with. I also need to tell it that it supports format CSV and JSON because otherwise that won't work. Actually, I think I took it out later, but let's leave it in for now. And then you define a little bit of HTML. This is a pooling templating language, system. So what happens here is that instead of pushing the data in, I'm pulling the data from somewhere. Where I'm pulling from, I'm configuring here. So this data is pulled from, so if you're in full control, you don't need to worry about this component is getting data from that source, and I need to configure the filtering for that in this menu item. That's all not a problem. You define it here. Then you have a function called collection. That function just returns you with the data. This is a collection of objects that contains that data, which is just going to be everything in your database table that you just filtered on. In the database table, we have something called URL, and we have something called title. So no problem, we do as item, item, URL, item, title, and just render that. The result of this is one file. It's dynamic. The logic is completely separated, but it's done in the background. And because the MVC is hidden, it's there. There's a full MVC there that you don't see. It's transparent. You can use any data source. Because I'm doing database here, I could do web service or I could do file system. I can get data from there. So if I have a JSON file on my local file system that contains structured data, I could get data out of that JSON file. You can copy paste it because it's just a one file. It's 100% cacheable, and I'll explain that in a bit because that's what it does, but it's work on that. And it doesn't use item IDs anymore because this is the complete URL. And it routes it to this page.
And in case of any exceptions, Pages itself will probably take care.
Yes. So there's its own, there's its own debugger in there, which you enable when you enable debug, and then it shows those. Okay. If you will run it in Joomlatools Server, you get the extra advantages of the things I explained yesterday with the error output. But yes. So where are we? This is basically a single file MVC. It's something that I always wanted to do and never really been able to completely put together how I should do it until I got the inspiration from the static site generators and how they were using front matter, because that was what made the click. I can use front matter in a file. I can use that to define my own DSL, in a sense, and I can combine that with rendering of the actual HTML. So this is your model. And the only thing that you're doing is defining it in what you could consider a DSL, because this is a sort of query language-ish simple form of that. This is your template. And it's not separated anymore in multiple files. It's just in a single file. So can you still use the menu item manager? Yes, you can, and actually I'm improving that because in later versions of Joomla, there is an API that allows you to dynamically inject menu items. I'm still fixing that, so you know. So you can still do that. There is advanced configuration where you can say, inject it in Joomla as this menu item. And then the Joomla menu item table will start recognizing it and actually even show it. Then you know that this is a link to that to get this complete integration going. So that's also still possible, but in most cases, not needed. I don't have a completely running one. You have, so we can switch in a bit. But I'll show a little bit of code, and I'll first explain how this works, the caching. So what Pages does, so caching is an enormous problem. And it's a really hard problem to solve. Because when you have a Joomla site and you make an edit to an article, our customer or user makes an edit to an article, and you have some form of caching on, then the site is not going to update. And then you need to have either teach the customer to click a sort of button that cleans all the cache, which is never really useful, or you need to have the caching off, or you need to turn the caching on later, and then still the problem happens in production. So it never really works well. So how can you solve that? The only way of solving it is by knowing exactly which data is rendered on a page. This is not a new concept. This is, for example, what a varnish cache does. By tagging caches, you basically tag a cache with certain tags, and then you can query the cache and say everything that is cached with content needs to be removed from the cache. That was one idea that I contemplated. Can I tag it? But then I need to have a database, and I don't want to have a database. So what I did was I'm generating, when this page is rendered, it's cached on the file system as a file. This is where the static site generator concept comes in, or the idea from a static site generator. It's not rendering a whole site. It's just rendering and caching a single page. So from the moment that the page is generated, it's static. Right? It's semi-static because it's cached as HTML, and on top of that, the headers are also being cached, which works the same way that Apache caches. Now, this is a collection. There is only one collection on this page. There could be multiple. Pages knows per page which collection are used. It stores that. It actually stores that in the cache file itself as metadata. And it stores this state. So it's a state machine per page. Now, you normally have 4, 5, 6, maximum 10 collections on a page. You're not going to have more, so it's quite easy to do. There is a cache revalidator process. When I fire off a request, I'll show it in a bit because I can show it on the Joomlatools side. When you fire off a request to Pages, the first thing that Pages will do is, depending on your cache settings, if the thing is in cache and it's a normal GET request, it will be returned from the cache, unless the cache is no longer valid. Basically, it has expired. It makes that check. The check takes approximately 30 milliseconds to make. It's just like opening the file, checking the last modified date header, comparing it with the cache setting, and then deciding, hey, this thing is expired. That's easy. So if you would publish this with, you can add here, you can add something like cache, semicolon, 1 hour, then you can make GET requests for 1 hour, and you would always get the same thing, even if your data changes. And after 1 hour, you get the update. If you don't do cache, semicolon, 1 hour, then it will automatically always make that check. So it's always going to check to see if something came in, which also means that you cannot cache this in a CDN, but you're still kind of like doing it like Joomla works right now. But you're not making a full request. The only thing you're doing is checking if it's still fresh. Takes 40, 50 milliseconds.
So with, if you have information that you only show to certain user groups, for instance, and you should not use the cache, or do you have other ways around that if you have the same collection but with multiple?
Yeah, I can, but this is the more advanced problem. So I'll start with the simple one. So the simple scenario is the website is public, and all the information is public. The more advanced scenario is that people are going to log in, and logging in, complex scenario. It can do all that, but there's a little bit of more work in explaining you how that works, and it's going to take a little bit around this. Then I need to start explaining you how I deal with smart e-tags and all of that, and it can do it. If you're not saying it needs to get cached for an hour or a day, which is great, which just makes it work like Joomla, you still want to have it to be fast. That basically means every time a user requests a page, the request will go to Joomla and will go to Pages. Right? So each time Pages receives that request, it will check first if the page is expired. Well, it's always expired because it doesn't have a lifetime. And then it makes a second check. It will get all the collections used on the page, and it will check if those collections have been updated, yes or no. In case of a database table, that is as simple as checking the last updated time for the database table, which is the crude check it makes out of the box. You can basically ask an InnoDB and the table, and any other table too. You can basically ask it, like, give me the last modified date of the whole table. And it compares that with a hash it stores internally. If those two dates don't match, then the table was updated.
So the contents table has a hits field, which will be updated with every.
Exactly. This is a smart guy. It's good that we have him. Yeah, exactly, Peter. I fixed that too. So this is the next step. He's always like one step ahead. I do like it. Thank you. So this is the crude check. If the table contains a data field and you can configure it, it actually here, no, it doesn't know it. You can configure it. You can basically say, use this field to calculate the hash. And if it's a date field, it will know specifically how to handle that, because often you're going to use date fields for that. So in Joomla's case, for web links or for any other table, you have date fields that contain the last modified date of the specific row. What it does is it fires off a query against all of those. So basically all published web links, fetches all the dates, and then creates a hash out of all of those. So if one of those changes, or if something new was added, the hash will not match, and it will know that the collection is no longer valid. You can come up with more advanced checks too. For example, when you start dealing with joins across multiple tables, you need to be able to calculate the hash across multiple tables. So then the query to create that hash becomes a little bit more complex. But that's basically it. So out of the box, it can do it in a very crude way, and it will work. And then you need to have a little bit more code in to make it. There is things that I simply cannot do out of the box. There's things that still need a little bit of PHP code. For the file system, this is easy. Just checking the last modified date for the file. Or if you want to go and look at the data, then you need to open up the file and read it. So that's not ideal. You will always use the last modified date. For HTTP requests, it's simple. You check you do a head call against HTTP so that you don't get your content back, which is a fast request. And then you check the headers and you see if there are caching headers available. So it will tell you something like an E tag, or it will tell you like a last modified. And then it uses those to calculate if the HTTP resource is fresh or not. If those headers are not available, then it's going to hash the content. Of course, HTTP is something that I cannot really make fast, right? Firing up an HTTP request takes a second to get back. So that's always, it works, but it makes the initial rendering of the page a little bit slower after it has fetched the first one. And you basically say this is going to be valid for a day, then you only need to fire off those additional requests once a day. I'm still solving that, but I cannot solve it in Joomla. I'm solving this in Joomlatools Server by having a background process fetch those and check to see if HTTP services are valid, yes or no. And then this will become super fast. But that's not completely done yet. So for databases, it's really fast. For file systems, it's really fast. For HTTP, it's a little bit slower. But it does not have any impact on your page. It only has impact when you would fire off this check for every request, of course. OK, so what it does then is, there are three ways of refreshing a page or going to a page. You can just get to the URL, which is a normal GET request. And then you have browser buttons. You have a refresh button in your browser. If you click your refresh button, then you're going to fire off a refresh request. You're going to force a revalidation request. So even if, for some reason, your page hasn't updated, you click the refresh button, and pages will automatically revalidate. If you go like, hey, I actually have made more changes to this page than just content changes, then you need to re-render it, because Pages doesn't know about CSS changes or HTML changes or template changes. And then you do a force refresh. So you're going to force refresh. Basically, either you open up Inspector and click no cache, or you do, what is it, like Shift-R or F5, and then it force refreshes, and you get the same result. Maybe quickly turn on my internet here and quickly try to show you that on a site. Is there internet here that you have a password for that, or should I? Well, I'll. Yeah, okay, it's no worries. Yeah, that will work. I can do it at joomlatools.com. This is actually our live site, but whatever. It's on doc. So a couple of things. So Pages has, OK, again, this is a workshop presentation. I cannot show all of it. The time is too slow. Pages has additional features included to make Pages really, really fast. The whole goal is to make a site render like that. And that's what is available on our site. There is what is called a prefetcher in here. Like watch, right? This request took 3 milliseconds. The page was instant. I'll do another one. 5 milliseconds. See how fast this is? This page is instant. It's faster than a static site generator. It's faster than a static site generator. because the page isn't coming from a server anymore. It's already in the browser. And that's because this is preloading, prefetching. What you see here, if you can read it, I cannot zoom in. I think I don't have.
Switch to the other tab on the right-hand side, all feds, etc., etc. At the end, there is the other.
Ah, where? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, this cache. No, it doesn't show that. No, it won't show that because it's in the fetch, so I need to show it here. So it says prefetched here. I'll open it up a little bit so that you can see.
At the bottom of the page.
Prefetch cache. So a browser, a modern browser, has something like a prefetch cache, which basically means that you can fetch a URL, store it in the browser cache, and then it will be available the moment that the user goes over and clicks on it. Now, I'm not really loading every page on this site. I'm preloading the main menu items. They're preloaded. And when you go into a sub-menu item, then the sub-menu gets preloaded. So I'm doing probably a maximum of 10 pages per page are preloaded. Because Pages supports HTML caching out of the box, all of this is cached on Cloudflare, in the HTML cache on Cloudflare. It's always coming from Cloudflare. The Cloudflare network has a latency of approximately 60 milliseconds worldwide. It takes, watch, right? This is still 5 milliseconds. And this is not preloaded. It's not when I go to this URL, Joomlatools, I went to Joomlatools, where was I at? Go one back, you will also see that it uses the, this is also instant because it uses the browser forward, it uses the browser navigation cache to go back and forward. So it becomes super fast. So I was here. This page is not preloaded. It's not prefetched in the background. But what is happening is it's prefetched on Hoover. So it takes a user approximately 250 milliseconds to hover over a region that is clickable and then click it. That our natural reaction speed is not faster than 250 milliseconds. So I have 250 milliseconds to prefetch the page. And that's what is happening here. While I basically go over this link, it's being prefetched in the background, and then this one takes a little bit longer. See, because I was too fast. Or because it wasn't in the cache, we can check that. No, because it wasn't in the cache. Yes, no, this is redirecting to help. Yeah, this won't work yet. This is true. Find another one, change log. This is in the prefetch cache. Find something that isn't about us. Again, it is too fast. I cannot show you that. This just happens. So we still have a couple of links that go to Help Scout, which are running a separate system. I'm integrating that using HTTP APIs in our own site, so you won't have that problem. So this site is as fast as it can be. It cannot be made faster. Unless I need to start adding JavaScript and not refreshing pages. I agree with that.
I didn't say
it. I saw you smiling, but you're right. It can be made still a little bit faster, but I'm staying away from JavaScript. The only JavaScript that runs here is the prefetcher. So that is how it works. Now, this poses a problem because I have all these pages cached in Cloudflare. How do I revalidate that cache? Right? Because all of the stuff is there, and I can revalidate the cache as follows, and I'll show you. So I said to you, if I hit the refresh button, right, then it takes 200 milliseconds in this case. Because what has happened now is, now I have made a request to the server, and the server has revalidated this page, and it basically is coming back with, okay, my page's cache was hit, and it was revalidated, and it's still valid. So I have sent you the page back that I have in cache. It actually should return in 304, but Cloudflare is stripping those out because it's removing my e-tags. I haven't fixed that yet. But just because we're 100% clear that that should also happen. If I turn on disable cache, and I do this again, then it's going to take a little bit longer. Now it takes 1.2 seconds because Pages now needs to go over all the collections, see if that they're fresh, get all the data, and then render the page. Takes a second. It's a little bit slower. That's okay. It can be slower because it's cached. Now Pages will say, the cache was missed because you told me to do that, and I have regenerated the page for you. This page is now back into the Cloudflare cache. So when I can basically go clear the browser cache here and go back here. It's going to need to fetch it. Oops. Did I lose my network? No. Now it needs to fetch it. And, oh, no, of course. I have disabled cache on. Stupid. Now we're back. 8 milliseconds. Right? So I can refresh my cache by clicking the browser button. I can refresh my cache. I can regenerate the whole page in case I've made an HTML change or a template change. Then Pages doesn't know about that. I considered doing it, but I haven't done that. So you then need to regenerate the whole page. You can do that turning cache off, making a request against it. When you do development, you will just disable cache, and all the pages will always be generated for you, so you always immediately see the result, and you're never having the cache get hit. This still poses a problem, because what if I make a change to an article, and that article is a blog post, and the blog post is visible as a listing here, and then as a listing here, and you see again 6 milliseconds, as a listing here, and to show you how fast this actually is, and the blog post itself, another 3 milliseconds. This is all being fetched in the background before I actually clicked it, right? So it's per page. And this blog post, what if I made a change to it, or changed the title, or did a change to it? Then all these 3 pages need to be regenerated. And then another nice thing that you can see here that Pages also does is, this is image generation. It handles responsive images on the fly. You see them blur in? Yeah, it goes fast, right? Because actually they have them already in cache. So Pages can generate images. It can generate responsive image tags and then generate the image for you. So what it does, and to quickly show you that, so this is a very small image. This is only 1 or 2 kilobytes as a data URI, which is initially shown as a placeholder. It's stretched out using CSS and blurred, so you get a blurred image. And then the actual responsive image is loaded in the background. So these are all the URLs of those responsive images. Those URLs there are no breakpoints that you define. There is nothing breakpoint-wise that you as a developer need to define. Pages calculates the breakpoints itself. And it does that by taking the file size of the image and the size of the image, and then making the file size, you can configure it, but by default, it's 25% smaller for each step. So each of those steps, the image is 25% smaller. You can set a max and a minimum in between it needs to make that calculation. So then those images are generated on the fly by the server. So if the image doesn't exist, then the server will generate it. And this is where Joomlatools Server comes in and where it generates the image for you. Okay, so I was going to show you, the caching problem. Oh yeah, I'll do it here. This is a Warp, by the way. This is a new CLI client from a startup in the States. They're actually building a complete new user interface for a shell using Rust. It's really powerful and really fast. All right. So I'm going to handle this problem, to handle this problem of revalidating all your cache, Pages includes a cache endpoint. I'll show it here. This is a little bit slow, but it doesn't matter because this only gets called like this. I hope. There we are. I'm still working on making this faster by putting the data into a database, but a SQLite database, but doesn't done yet. So these are all your pages. So these are all the pages on the site. Normally you wouldn't expose this publicly. You put something behind it, but then again, it doesn't really matter either because there's nothing really in there that people cannot know. So this is all your pages. The URL of the page, the date it was last modified, the hash for the page, an internal token for the page. This token, Peter, is internally used to handle your problem. This is an internal token that takes into account a logged-in user. So you can have multiple pages, multiple URLs with different tokens so that you can recognize different users. This token is also used to handle forms without cookies and do double out even. It does double authentication on the form through the token. Technically not needed, but needed for forms that are behind authentication, that are being behind logins. So the XSRF check that Joomla normally does with the cookie and everything, that's not needed anymore. It works through this token. Format HTML, language, English, collection, pages, because it knows for each page what the collections for the page are. The robot tag, so you can tell a page that doesn't need to be indexed by robots by saying that it doesn't need to go into a sitemap. The status, this was a 200, and it's valid. It's valid is true. This is removed now because the validation happens per page. So it fetches this. This is your complete list. So the reason that this is slow is because this is all the pages. In the latest version of Pages, this is not deployed on Joomlatools.com yet. That's for next week. In the latest version, this is paginated per 100 items, so it's not slow anymore. That's actually how I solved it. The next step is a database. So we have all those. So what we're going to do, oh no, this I don't need. I need this one. So what we're going to do is, you cannot see this. This is weird. You can see it now. So what we're going to do is we're going to fire off a request against Joomlatools Server, because this is where I need Joomlatools Server. This is not something that Pages and Joomla can do. We're going to fire off a request against the API that sits in Joomlatools Server, and there's a little bit of a revalidation API running in there. It's really simple. It fetches the JSON that I just shown you, gets all the URLs, and then starts firing off requests against each of them to see if that they're still valid, yes or no, and if not, regenerate them. It can regenerate the whole site. This is technically a static site generator, in a sense. But then, a little bit different. It's my take on the problem. So I'll quickly show you that. Just run it. I'm going to run it not against our live site. I'm going to run it against the new live site that is running on Fly, now so you can see how it works. So it's fetching the cache, and then it's going to go through all the pages. Done. 14 seconds, 144 pages with a concurrency of 25. That's how fast it can be. This is really fast because the only thing it does for all of these pages is it makes a request to Pages, and it basically asks Pages like, hey, is this page still valid, which is the same thing as hitting the reload button on the browser. If I do that, Pages will reply in 50 to 70 milliseconds saying, hey, no, this page has not been modified because all the collections on the page are valid, so no problem. It has found a couple of pages that actually had to be modified, like this blog page had to be regenerated, this developer page had to be regenerated, probably because there is semi-dynamic content on there. We have a couple of pages where images are switched in a different order, logos of customers actually are switched. So each time you regenerate the page, it goes like, yeah, this page is actually not valid anymore because I need to switch things around. And then it regenerates that.
It also says somewhere regenerated cache JSON. And then filter, oh, no. No, it's further there.
Yeah.
So it takes token into account as well, or is it just, it will ignore the token?
Well, in this case, this is a public site, so all the token setups that I'm trying to that exist are not being used here at all. Like the moment that needs to start being used, I need to do a little bit of extra work. The code is foreseen to be able to do this scenario with users, but the implementation and the full, I can show you this like this, isn't completely there yet. So, because users are a complex case, quickly explaining how this won't work with users. Because a user page, you will not want to cache in a CDN, right? Because then it makes no sense, it's for a single user. You want to cache that page in the user's browser. So you turn off CDN caching, which is just a setting in the page. You basically say this page cannot be cached in the CDN. Then you don't need to worry about this problem of revalidating your CDN. You also don't need to worry about the problem of revalidating your cache because Pages will not even cache it internally. Still, the page can be very fast. I don't have an example to show you for next time when I have more demos, but how does that work? A page contains an E tag. You know what an E tag is? Okay. So I have implemented a mechanism. Again, didn't come up with all of this stuff myself. I found a discussion of 2003 where people were talking about the concept of a smart cache, the concept of a smart active cache. There has been some talk in the web world about that. Nobody really built one. And the idea that they came up with was, what if you put validation information for a page in an E tag? And that's what I do. So the collection information that Pages uses to define how to know if a collection is fresh or not, which is the name of the collection, and then the state of that collection, which is data that doesn't mean anything for an external system. That information is serialized and then shrunk into an E tag. And it's not much data because it's only 5 to 10 collections. It's like this, you get this very long string of, let's say, 180 characters or something like that. That's approximately where I'm at. So what happens is, if your page is in your cache, Pages doesn't really care about the E tag. Pages will get the E tag from the local cache. So a page can come on without an E tag and it will still work. This is why it works here. If there is no page in your cache, so basically you can run Pages without file system caching and it will still be fast. If there is no page in your cache, then it will rely on the E tag. And the E tag is always sent by the browser. The browser sends it back. Each time you click on a link, the browser will send that E tag that it has in cache back to the server. Pages will read out the E tag, will deserialize it, get the collection information from the E tag, and then do the revalidation process based on that information. It can then figure out if the page that browser has in cache is still valid, yes or no. If it's still valid, it will send back a 304, and the site will not be updated. That process we will start using for our own Joomlatools dashboard, where customers need to log in, and I don't want to store that in a file cache, but I will still want to have the same performance. So all the other complexity with validating and storing that normally come with authentication of users become a non-issue because the information sits in the E tag. The only requirement is that the E tag is sent. And the E tag is always sent besides when you click reload. Then the E tag is stripped. In all other cases, it's sent. Now, these are really complex problems, right? What this solves is I spent 4 years working on this, and then a lot of reading and a lot of research. This is not something that I came up with on my own. This is inspiration from a lot of people out there that thought about these problems, because the problems are discussed in depth and solutions are not always found. I think I'm getting quite close to making it just work. So that's how it works. So if you would want to, I can show the last one, just for the fun of it. Let's do that, and you can see that it's going to be slower. So the last scenario is I have made a change to a template, a layout, or whatever, CSS. CSS files are not a problem because they're cache busted on the fly, but still I need to recalculate the hash, so I still need to regenerate. Then I do a process called regeneration. What I just did was what I call revalidation. This is just checking if the pages and the content on the pages is still valid. Revalidation. Regeneration basically means I don't care about the content on the page, just go and regenerate it for me. We will do that like this. And what's the problem? What? That's no fun. Curl is playing up. Okay. Did I turn my server off? No. Let's try it quickly without trying to figure out why it doesn't work here. I'll do it in POW then. Let's do it here. Turn it on. Do it on the development server just to be sure. So this is a Gracie 10 4s. A lot of this stuff is still a little bit in testing, but it works. Only the Joomlatools Server stuff sometimes doesn't 100% work. Okay, so the Pages has an HTTP API. I just curled the HTTP API. For some reason, it doesn't want to do the next request, so we're going to try it using a POW, which is an HTTP client. Works in the same way. So I'm making a post request against, in this case, our internal staging site, API revalidate. And if all goes well, this should fire. Okay, that's weird. Yeah. I cannot explain that problem. It just worked and it doesn't work in. Oh, I can explain the problem. Oh my God, it works. But it's switched from, oh yeah, cool. Let's try to do it again here then. So I put it to true. See, that's the thing with live demos. You always like panic, like, shit, I coded something wrong. Sorry for the bad language. Fracking hell. So now it's going to take slower. It's going to take more time, right? Because right now, as you can see, it's regenerating every page. But still, this is running inside Joomlatools Server with a concurrency of 25. The server is optimized for performance, so you can see that it actually still goes pretty damn fast. So each page is being regenerated. Inside Joomlatools Server, OpenSwool is running. OpenSwool is managing this internal process in an async kind of way. I have a maximum amount of 25 PHP FPM workers that I can open up, because otherwise I run out of memory. So that's my max concurrency in a sense. I could do more. I tested it with a 2 GB server, and then this thing runs in, like, I can make this run in 25 seconds. But then you need a little bit more memory to handle more processes.
That's not something you do every day, so.
No. Because you normally make a change to a site, so this is only something that you would do if you have changed the template or played with that. In most cases, that happens 1 or twice a year because you made those changes for a customer, and the rest you don't. So what I'm now trying to do, because this is actually evolved a little bit in the talk about caching, what I'm now trying to do is, through Joomlatools Server, I'm trying to implement this caching also for a normal Joomla. The only problem for a normal Joomla is that I cannot revalidate because I don't know about the content on the page, but I can regenerate. So I can cache it, And then I can run this process to regenerate it. You will see that some of these requests become slow. Like, for example, all the documentation requests are slow because the documentation is fetched over the Help Scout HTTP API. So those are requests that take 1, 2, 3, or sometimes 4 seconds, depending on how fast I want to give me the content back. Still trying to solve that one, which is tricky. Integrating web services and fetching content from web services is 1, tricky, and 2, it's a bottleneck and a problem that can go wrong, because what if the server doesn't reply? Then Pages will say that it couldn't regenerate the page and continue, but then still the page hasn't been updated. So here we are. It took 65 seconds for a total of 144 pages. So, not bad, right? With a concurrency of 25. And then the last one I will show you, I cannot show you that here. Okay, so yesterday I showed you this. I'll revalidate it, not force. It's going to take too long. Yesterday I showed, in the presentation, I showed you Joomlatools Server, and I was talking about fly.io. For if you missed it, no problem, I'll explain it again. So fly.io is a new hosting infrastructure that is being built by a small group of very talented, I call them geeks, because they have a little bit of funding, but most of the funding actually they invested themselves. And they're using a technology called Firecracker. Firecracker is technology made by AWS in 2018 to run Fargate. You know Fargate? No. It's what AWS uses for their hosting, in a sense. It's lightweight micro VMs. Long story short, you can deploy instances of an application in multiple regions. This is our demo site or testing site for the new Joomlatools.com site, which is running right now in 2 regions, Amsterdam and LAX. This is the same setup that is being deployed in 2 different places. That makes this revalidation process even more complex, because right now I don't want to revalidate the cache in a single site, in a single instance. I want to revalidate it in Amsterdam and in Los Angeles. That's what I'm going to do here. So we're going to fire this off. It's not going to show you this immediately because this is in the client here. And I cannot show you it in curl because for some reason, curl doesn't reply with the reply from the second server. I'm still fixing that bug, or still trying to figure out why. So I'll fire it off. You just need to wait. We just need to wait until it returns. It's going to take approximately 15 seconds. So what is happening right now is, yeah, this is the right server, right? Yes. What is happening right now is this revalidate request is being captured by the Fly proxy, which is then forwarding it to the nearest instance, which is running in LAX. You will see that LAX is going to reply. No, it's going to be Amsterdam because we're here. Sorry. It's going to be Amsterdam because we're in Amsterdam. If it's GitHub doing it, it will be LAX. And then Amsterdam will forward the request to LAX, to Los Angeles, and it will also start running its revalidation process. Those 2 processes are running simultaneously. So it's not waiting for the first one to complete. And if all goes well, and otherwise, it's busted, which also happens. Sometimes it breaks. And the same in the meantime. We're done. It took a little bit longer than expected. It took 77 seconds, probably because it has done quite a little bit of regeneration too. So we will go over the list. So this is AMS replying. This is the internal IP address for that node. This is the whole not modified. And then doing some regeneration here, a little bit of regeneration here, here, and here. And then if all goes well, I don't think, yeah, Los Angeles has not replied, so we have a little issue there. I wanted to show you that, but it hasn't. Okay, so for some reason, Los Angeles hasn't replied. That's okay. I'll need to figure that out. One other thing I wanted to show you, actually we could figure out if Los Angeles is still online, but it is. Is going here. So the nodes that are running, this is a little bit showing what I talked about yesterday with Joomlatools Server. This is a little bit hard with the darkish thing. I'm not sure how I can switch that. No. That I don't know for sure. Preferences, discard, light, save. This is my name, dude. Huh? Okay. Okay. Okay, now I can show you. It seems so, right? Thank you. Okay, so we can show you this. So let's figure out why Los Angeles wasn't replying and to see if it's still up. Production. It's still up, so there's probably some other error. But I can actually show you this. So this is so Joomlatools Server allows you to export metrics. The metrics can then be imported in Grafana, and you get a complete overview of how the server is running. We had this little glitch. I need to fix that. It can happen. Still working quite hard on all of this. But this is the server itself. So we actually did a revalidation request against the server and a regeneration request, so we can actually see what the server was doing. This is the overview, the fly overview. This is the server instance itself. So you see the concurrency is 40 and 25. So LAX has been active, but it hasn't replied. So it has done the cache revalidation, but it hasn't replied. It's up. This is the RPMs, the requests per minute. So you see the spike here that we just did is our revalidation request. And then you see some other information about each service. So this is Swool service, Apache service, PHP my npm service. And then I can go to an individual service. Let's take Apache to see what Apache has been doing. So now it's going to fetch the data. This is the last hour. I'll do it for all regions. So this is Apache. Apache is up. This is my CPU load. So you see that it's nominal quite low. And here you see my spike. All right, this is just my revalidation request. So it basically went up to like a spike of 500 requests per minute over both instances because I was doing approximately 200 per instance, right? If I set it to a single region, let's only go for LAX. Yeah, because something went, yeah, it has done them. So the cache revalidation has happened, but it simply hasn't replied. I have some issues with that. In curl, it also doesn't reply all the time. I'm not really sure why that is. It has to do something with the internal coroutines, but I'll fix that. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But you see that it has done the cache revalidation because this is LAX. At the same time, you see this spike, so it has done that. We could see the kilobytes per second that it transferred the worker statuses. We could check PHP FPM. PHP FPM will also show us this same information. This is LAX. This isn't working, so that's not correct. All the rest is. So we see the requests per minute in PHP FPM, the CPU load that it generated, the processes that it used to do what it was doing. And then finally, we can go to Swool, which is the actual API service itself. And we can limit that. So I'm now filtering on the production server in the LAX region for the API service. And this is everything that the API service was doing. So it's up. These are the event workers and the task workers it's running because it's configured to run 4. And this is my CPU load. You see that my CPU load spiked here for the revalidation process. These are my requests per minute that are coming through during my revalidation process. You see my memory usage per worker, that went up. My coroutines spiked. Coroutines are mini threads that it uses to do everything that it's doing. So it spiked and then went down again. Objects per worker, these are the PHP objects internally that it creates, so it keeps track of those. If this would stay high, I would have a memory leak. This is my resources per worker. This is I/O that it has been doing. Spiked also because I've been doing quite a lot of HTTP requests, up to 140 in, this is per minute, I think. And this is my connections that are actually coming in. So they're quite nominal. Then I have something extra here, which is also nice that I added. This is the amount of, why is the count gone? I'll switch it to all. And then probably it needs to have all here. No, this should show a count, but it isn't. So the idea here is that it shows a count. This was working yesterday. It's gone now. Weird. This shows a count of the amount of objects, objects for this specific class that are being created. If this count keeps going up, then you also have a memory leak. So this is a little bit about Swool, right? So we talked yesterday about Joomlatools Server. Very quickly for you, there's a piece of technology in there that is called OpenSwool. Look it up online. It's very similar to Go or Node. Allows you to do async programming with PHP. The revalidation process that I just shown you runs on top of Swool and can run async. This is why I can do concurrency 25 and do this amount of HTTP requests on this instance. This instance is running 1 GB of memory, 1 CPU. So it's not overdone. It's actually also very cheap to run. It costs $5 a month. Right? So this is what kind of performance you get from a completely customized stack when you run it like that. Yeah, this is far. So this is what I a little bit wanted to explain. I haven't never explained the caching, so you also have seen it in action. You know how it works, right? So those are the ideas. I'm not sure what time it is. If we still have questions or things that you want to show there, we still have a little bit.
Yeah, I've got one small question. I checked on your page Joomlatools a couple of menu items, and the demo menu items take a little bit longer.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Because the demos are separate instances of Joomla, and they're not running pages.
Oh, okay.
So there are links that go to external sources. Like there's still stuff going to Help Scout, which isn't very fast. That I'm fixing because it will be integrated over API. And the demo sites are demo sites, right? We are going to put the demo sites on Fly using Joomlatools Server. This is why I finished it all. So it's going to run on Joomlatools Server and using Fly. It's going to be a little bit faster, but it's still a demo site. Right? I don't really think I can. Otherwise, it's going to be. People want to test it out to see if it works, and yeah, absolutely. Now I'm here. I'll also show you Sentry. I didn't do that yesterday. All right. So Joomlatools Server can export metrics, which is using Prometheus. If you look up Prometheus, you will find the information about it. It's an open source protocol to send out metrics. The metrics are exported by a metrics endpoint in the server. Is this thing still up and running? Yeah. So this is the metrics coming out. And the graphs that I just shown you, the dashboards are created based on those metrics. So you can create your own dashboards depending on what you want to show. The other thing that we do is we also implement open tracing. Open tracing is a protocol to export tracing information and performance information using spans. So you can, in your code, you can basically say, span this specific unit of code and see how long it takes. I'm not sure if I have a performance example immediately available. I probably do, if I go back in time.
We still have 20 minutes.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, let's show the do pages a little bit, and then we can answer some questions from there. Um,
You mentioned span. Is it something like
a span is a
microseconds start?
yeah,
Ah, yeah.
a span. I'm trying to show you one, but yeah, here's one. So these are the spans. And you can add as many as you want by putting little bits of code in that wraps a unit of work in your code. And then you get that information out. So this was a request that in total took 400 milliseconds. And these are the little things that happen. So you can see where things are slow in your code. This works against Joomla. You can use it with a normal Joomla. Or it works again inside Joomlatools in Joomlatools Server automatically because I have this implemented automatically. If you implement it in Joomla itself, then you need to implement it around wherever you want to check. Right? But possible. You could build a system plugin that wraps it around certain events to see how long they take. Come on. Let's do some stuff. Are there any more questions? So the idea with Pages is one, to be able to solve performance and caching, and two, to be able to allow you to create a page from a blank canvas, getting in data from any data source, either a database, an existing Joomla component, because that works too. We have an integration for Joomla that we will show that can do that, or HTTP. And then revalidate cache using an additional process in this case, so that we can revalidate the cache for a whole site, which takes just...
So is Joomlatools Server included in Joomlatools Pages?
No, they're two separate things. So if you go to Joomlatools, GitHub Joomlatools, you will find Joomlatools Pages repository, and you will find Joomlatools Server repository. The Joomlatools Server was the presentation yesterday, but I can show you a little bit more later if you want to.
This is just Joomlatools Pages? Yeah. This isn't server, this is running on Joomla?
Yeah, right.
All right, sorry.
There you go. I will help you pin it.
Okay.
You're good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, we good? Right, this is just Joomlatools Pages. It's not Joomlatools Server. It's Pages running on Joomla. As you can see, there's Joomla there, and I've got this set up in a multi-site setup rather than in Joomlatools Pages, just so that I can run. I'm actually building this site here, but I'll show you that in a sec. And this is just the site template, the default site repo.
Maybe you need to add that this is the blog demo.
Yeah. This is it's actually not the blog demo. This is a different site that I'm building that I've put.
You can show that.
Hang on, let me show you what I'm doing.
In Joomlatools Pages repository, you will find a content folder. I'll stand there. You will find a content folder. In that content folder, you can go there. You just go to.
Hang on, I can do it.
No worries. You have internet or not?
Yeah.
Okay. There is a content folder, and in there you find an example of how to build cited pages, which is part of that was in the show. That uses the Joomla blog demo data.
Right. This is actually this site here that I'm building. Right. So as you can see, I'm just using the same content as just a different site, same database tables, which is why you're seeing the about page, because I'm pulling it out here, and this is the content of it here. Pretty much, what was it I was going to show you?
That's WordPress.
Yeah, that was the Docman WordPress, yeah. So what we have here is, as Johan was saying earlier on, is we have our pages are all set up here, and our templates are laid out in layouts and partials.
Take a page. Take one page.
I'll take one page. I'll do the blog page.
Okay. The index.
Index.
Okay. Go to the URL.
Right. Hang on. If I go there, you'll see.
So
I've got.
there's a relationship between the URL and the physical page in the file system by default. You don't use wrapping. This is the page.
So this is the page, and as you can see, he's just pulling out regular blog articles, listing them.
Click one to show that the routing to go to the full article works. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
So it's very simple, right? Listing item. Okay.
And
so
that's,
now show the listing page in the code. So in the file structure, you have
that's the listing page there.
There you are.
So I'm defining the route, which is there. The layout, I'm selecting.
Not too fast, man.
All right, sorry, man.
So the route blog / digit page, basically meaning blog, and then whatever comes after it with a question mark behind it could be there or not. And if it's there, I'm expecting a digit with something behind it. It's like a slug that starts with a digit, which is the ID of the article, which is also how Joomla does it. And then the rest of the title so that I can fetch the Joomla article. Normally, you won't need this because this is how Joomla works. So we need to give this information to Joomla so it can fetch the article. What you see here is an integration with Joomla, and you can continue. So this is, the model is the Joomla model. We built a special integration for the Joomla content component so that you can pull data from Joomla using this model. State is 2, publish is 1, sorting is by date, order is descending, and the category is blog. And then you can continue.
I've got it limited to 2 so that I can.
Yeah, go ahead.
If you make a mistake with state, so instead of order, sort date, you say sort blah blah. Do you get an error or just ignore it?
See.
No, probably not 100% yet. That's where small things we talked about.
I'll show you. Let's do it, and I'll do it.
It's probably not just going to do anything with
So I can do anything at all.
Yeah, it's going to ignore errors and everything.
Oh, hang on, I'm cached.
There's no validation on states to see what states are accepted, yes or no. That doesn't exist yet.
Question for the routing to work, does the database need to respect some Joomla stuff? I'm thinking about published, or can you do it like with? Can you choose your own tables? Like, does it need to have the alias, etc.?
What?
Alias.
Oh, yeah. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. You can do it with any table, and it just works. But in this case, we're showing it with the Joomla blog demo data. So we're using a special model that is being built to work off the Joomla database tables with the content component.
That's this here.
You can show that. Well, it's zipped here, but
What is it?
unzip it. It will keep working.
Yeah.
So we built Pages allows us to build extensions. This is an extension for Joomla content component. If you go into one of the models, take the articles model. So this is the articles model. What this does is it doesn't talk to the Joomla APIs because they're too limited. I'm talking directly to the database table, and I'm implementing all the features that Joomla has plus everything else that I want. Example, this does proper filtering on tags, which is something that Joomla cannot do. Like if you go lower, lower, where are the tags?
Tags, yeah.
This is pretty complex to go out to figure it out. But this allows you to filter on tags and do things like this tag and not that tag or that tag. So you can really combine tags and then across categories get articles back. Joomla cannot do that. Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
Go back to.
Is it in that you deal with the propagation of SEL to access to the cache? The write access is because in Joomla you can't access to some contents because of the write access.
Yeah, go up. Up to the states. Up.
Columns.
Here. There is an access state here.
Yeah, that's it.
Which is automatically set to the roles of the user that is logged in. So it will automatically filter it based on that. Unless you change it. If in your model.
In there?
Here? No, in the log.
Hang on, in there?
No. Yeah, there. If you would add an access state here, then and then hard code a role, it would only take it for those roles. Right? So there's a default, which is the default that sits in Joomla, and then you can go from there. Again, the whole idea with pages is to never get into your way. You start with a blank canvas. It's configuration by convention, so there is configuration available for almost everything through the states, and there are meaningful defaults available so that it just works when you get started.
Another thing, you had a zip file, and
Yes.
you just zipped it.
Yeah.
Was it working out of the zip file?
Yeah, watch.
Yeah.
Does it slow down because it has to?
It's using file.
That's all good questions. So this is built in, it's all documented in the release notes. If you go to the discussions on GitHub, you find the release notes for the different releases. You find a lot more information about how this works. If you go to the PRs in GitHub, you also find a lot more documentation. Everything is kind of documented there, and it's not all in the wiki yet. I tried to make really good documentation. Explaining this quite quickly. This is a FAR. So the problem with Joomla's what I tried, without giving criticism, what I tried to solve is make it easy to install extensions without needing to have a full-blown extension installer. I don't have a database, so I'm not writing to any database, and I wanted to make it as easy to install an extension as giving somebody a file. The whole idea with Pages is that it's a single file. You have a problem, you come to GitHub, or he has a problem, and he comes to me and says, hey, this doesn't work, and I said, send me the file. And now look at the file, I'll test, I send you the result back. It needs to be a single file, it can easily be copy and pasted. The same thing is true for extensions. Of course, there's multiple files in an extension, but the extension is zipped in a FAR. The FAR is a special PHP archive, which is not slower. It works through a PHP stream, and PHP will just go in there and load information from it. So the performance is not hit.
Which one of those takes precedence now? Is it one or the other one?
The other one. So the reason that is because it allows you to open it up, make modifications to it, and then those modifications will be used. If you now delete the zip file, I'm not sure if it's deleted, refresh your page.
Yeah, no, it still works.
Does that also work?
Yep.
And go back?
If I go back and delete that, it's not going to work.
No, don't delete it.
No, actually, it is going to work because package is there.
No, that's off. There's a setting, I turned it off by default. There's a setting that allows you to regenerate the packages. So if you do a request and this has been modified, it will automatically create a zip file for you. It's actually automatically packaging an extension and repackaging that extension. If you go into package.php. So this is the URL where it fetches the Joomla extension from. So you can, in your pages configuration, you can add this URL. This is files Joomlatools.com pages. It's actually it's a proxy URL for GitHub, and it will fetch the latest release automatically from GitHub. It runs over a Cloudflare worker, fetches that. It's basically we rebuild packages in a Cloudflare worker. It actually,
Yeah, I've deleted it. I deleted it deliberately just to show you that if I reload that, it still works.
Now it's there.
And now it's there again. Hang on. No. Why is it? Hang on. Is it because it's cache? Why is it not there now?
I think you're gonna break it this way.
I think I am.
Upload it again.
It's still loading yet.
Yeah, it's still there. But where is it?
But where is it?
This is unprepared demos.
It works.
This
Why it works.
shouldn't happen.
This shouldn't happen.
But basically the idea is you put it.
delete everything, it still works.
You put it.
It is super caching.
Why is that?
You delete your
Why is that working? It's still there, yeah.
Are you in the wrong side, in the right side? Because you're probably.
No, I'm in the right one. It's Joomla 3.
What you're getting is a cast.
Hang on, let me do.
Maybe
What did you do? What did you do here?
Turn off caching because it could be returning the page from the cache. That worked. Yeah, now it's gonna fail. I hope. No.
Oh, you hope it's failed.
No, it still works.
We'll see.
You were
I don't know what I did, man.
I think you're in the wrong
That's
side.
very strong.
Anyway.
Very strong.
I explain it to you. So you have the URL, but when you add URLs for extensions, the URL can come from anywhere. It could come from your local machine, it could come from wherever you want to have it.
Oh, hang on. I probably am in the wrong file.
Wait, we still have 5 minutes, so see what you want to
Yeah,
tell.
sure.
Right.
But going in on questions that people have, it fetches the extension,
I'm in the
installs
wrong
it for
one.
you. Installing an extension is as simple as putting the file in place. If you want to edit the extension, you open it up, you make modifications.
Right, I was in the wrong one.
If you enable it, it will rezip it for you. You can add a little
I'll
bit
do it this
of
time. Right, this is the right one this time, right?
Yeah, you're in
And
the
the-
wrong side.
No, I'm in the right one now. Watch. I'll reload. It'll come back up, and then there you go. Extensions is back.
So can you open it up? So it works. Good.
Yeah, it works.
Okay, open up the manifest.
Right.
So there's a little bit of a manifest. There's not much in there. Simple. This is the name of the extension, so let's give it a name. And then there's a version number in it. The version number is also added when the URL, when you put it into GitHub, you have this like GitHub worker that then creates the package out of it, puts it in the releases, and adds the version number to it. So if you follow that, then you can version your own extensions. If you open it up, you make modifications to it, and you rezip it, then not that version number, but the version number stored in the FAR file will be increased. It will add a little dash with an additional version. It knows the revisions. It's a revision version that it adds. So then you know this was version 2.1, revision 8.
So if you change it to 2.0, it will be overwritten again. Or
Yeah, something like that. But not in that file. The file is static in the FAR. Anyway, go back to the blog. So we have still 5. So the code. A little bit more code. So if you want to play with this, right? This you can install into your Joomla 3 site. It's not compatible with Joomla 4 yet. That's for the coming weeks. I need to fix that. You can also start playing with Joomlatools Server, but you don't need those. So you can just get started with a normal Joomla and installing Pages. Installing Pages is as simple as downloading the package, uploading it to your Joomla site. And then you can start by having the blog sample data enabled and then installing this example site, which is just downloading the site package and putting it into place. Double clicking, unzipping, renaming the folder name to pages-Joomlatools, and you're good to go. Questions, ask on GitHub discussions, I'm happy to help you.
Open this page. Just open this page.
Right, I've got that locally as well, Mark.
Go to the blog code. What are you trying to do now?
No, I was just going to show what the.
Then you can start playing with it. There's too much to show. Like in one presentation, this is basically the work that went into this in terms of code and time is probably 2 to 3 times as much as I spent working on 1.5. I worked on this like full time, 2.5 to 3 years. Plus another year.
GCF test.
So it has things like we were talking about yesterday, blocks. Like it has layouts which are hierarchical. What are you showing now?
Marks.
Okay.
Test,
But can you quickly go back first, and then we can show marks to the code?
To the code page.
Yeah, so that I can simply no. The blog, which is that one.
Yeah, that one.
All right. So quickly go over some of these things so you know where they belong, right? Layout. These are layouts. Layouts are being put into templates layouts and can be loaded from there. Slash basically means root of the layouts folder and then sidebar layout. Layouts are hierarchical, so go back to the sidebar layout.
Let me show you the layout. Sites, blog, templates, layouts.
Alright, so layouts are hierarchical. This is the sidebar layout, which is then in turn loading the default layout. Go to the default layout. This is the default layout, which is basically the layout for the whole page with all the things that are recurring. And then it goes to the index layout. The index layout is actually what is rendering the whole HTML page with header and footer, which reuses a document template. There's a reusable document template in there that defines how the header is put together and how the body is put together. You can code it yourself or you can reuse it. this is where go back, because we can never explain all of it. The collection we explained, and then you have, there is a difference between things with have an ampersand in front and things that have not. The things that have an ampersand in front are called attributes. The things that don't have an ampersand in front are called properties. Attributes are things you cannot filter on. They're metadata for the page that kind of like provide instructions for the page, like which layout to use, which route to use. Properties are filterable. They are stored, so you can, for example, say, give me all pages with name blog, and it can do that.
You should have up something. You need
The outside.
I'm saying it wrong. What is it called in English?
At.
Okay. The at in front of it. Sorry about that. So yes, so those are the differences. Internally, if you forget to add them, everything will continue to work. But then you suddenly can start like filtering on a route, which you probably don't want. So this is how it makes a difference between the two. You can start adding things like tags, which is also supported. So there's a property tags, and then you can tag a page, and then you can start filtering on those tags. I'm going down. The thing with pages is that in Joomla, when you need to inject stuff into the header of your page, that is kind of tricky. In pages, that just works. This is a link, which is routed for blog.rss, because the blog also has RSS output. I'm just putting the link here.
But if I show you,
Pages will filter this whole page and then put the link into the header. Like it's just going to put it there. Right,
yeah.
it's there. And go back. Then this is KHTML. Everything starts with KHTML, which stands for Koa, which is the name of our framework, HTML, which are little tags. KHTML block, which is the replacement of modules. I'm defining. There's a block defined in the main layout.
it's in this one. Yeah, it must be in this one.
It's always a little bit hard to know where it is, but
Hang on. Where is it?
doesn't matter where it is, but I can explain it. So there is a block defined somewhere. The block is called main header, which is the header on top of the page. He's looking for it. In that block, I'm going to inject this content. This old stuff is injected in there. So I'm rendering it on this page, but I'm injecting it in a parent layout. So this will not be rendered in place here, it will be injected. Extend main header. When you define the block, it's simply HTML block, name is main header, extend it, and then extending it by injecting. It renders this and injects it. Then here I'm rendering the articles. There is something called a partial. A partial is a little bit a reusable piece of HTML rendering logic that you want to reuse in different places. The partial is also into templates partials.
I want partials and
These are all
it's
partials.
articles list.
So this is a partial to render a list of articles. Go back. And okay, and I'm rendering the partial here, loading it. This is the URL of the partial. This is the variable it accepts, which is the collection for this page. And then everything goes from there.
In 1999, I used a tool which was called WD.
Open this so that people have the demo.
Yeah.
Good.
Do you want me to plug this in here?
No,
No.
just open the page.
All right. Okay. Yeah.
Just open the page on your browser. Just type the URL. Pages.
All right. And then
Again, but it's done on the
Joomla custom
Back again,
feeds.
right?
Because
I'm not trying to
originally I
claim
made
that
it
I'm
different.
I've got this loaded locally.
This was part of my talk yesterday, right?
Fields.
Built on what is before you.
.org.
I want to say at the beginning, it's a lot of the ideas.
Oh, no, yeah.
A lot of these ideas here actually come from a language called Zul. Zul is the user interface language that Mozilla and Netscape developed, because Netscape originally had this language to develop the user interface for Netscape and for Mozilla. It was an XML-based language called Zul that stopped doing it. But 10 years ago, I bought this big book about Zul. And a lot of the inspiration for the JDOC tags HTML tags are also coming from that. So the idea is that it is HTML in a sense, but it's XML actually. You wrap it and you filter it out. The last one.
Yeah.
Our good friend Mark, he's trying to kick me out. Our good friend Mark has been on.
We should feed those people.
Yeah, we should. Well, they're not hungry yet, I think. Our good friend Mark, which is an awesome contributor to Pages for the past couple of a year and more already.
Yeah.
Right? Almost a year and a half. He took the task upon himself to create a beginner's guide. You can find it on its own site, pages.joomlacustomfields.org. And there's all these different pages that are created in Pages that explain how to do things with Pages.
It's from a user perspective, because in the presentation, the excellent presentation that we both made, we saw Pages, well, we saw Joomlatools servers and then Pages behind the scenes and all the technical stuff and everything. But if you want to start to play with Pages, that is more a kind of user guide. I'm no developer. I mean, this is all I made by myself, so it's super easy. Just you see the examples and you learn by the examples. So
because that is what I would like to see happening, right? If you like this, what I hope will happen, we will see, is that people start doing things like what Mark did and start sharing them. Because you can build a page in a file, and you can, like for example, there's an Airtable example here. Go to Airtable.
Yeah, that's it.
And then go down. This is where the code is somewhere, I think.
yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's it.
That comes from the Airtable. There's a link to the Airtable, and you see. Scroll down a little bit, yeah.
And where's the code for it? Is it here or not?
No, there should be.
If you want the full code, go on the code page.
The page discussion. Okay, so that
All right.
discussion, you see. So this is a great example of how I would love this to work. So this is Mark coming in and saying, hey, I have this Airtable thing for a customer or something like that. I'm not really sure what it was, or it's something you want to play with.
We had published it, but
Yeah,
it was not working when I tested it. And then I said,
Somebody else came in with the question.
Yeah.
I have a customer, I want to publish information on Airtable, I want to show it on my Joomla site. How can I do it with Pages? And I coded for half an hour, and I said, okay, what is your link for Airtable? Share it with me, and I'll see what data comes out, and I'll code it for you. So you go down.
I remember what this was for.
This thing is an Airtable model. You can just copy paste the code, put it in your in Pages, in your models folder, and it will just work. Makes a connection with Airtable, so suddenly you can do what Mark did. If you then go back to what Mark explained, then the only thing you do is copy that and then follow this. And this is how I would like this to work. Because suddenly we can start building all sorts of cool stuff in single pages. We can put those pages in GitHub snippets or in comments somewhere. We can share them. We can put them on a site. And suddenly all these bits and pieces become reusable. If you need to know how Airtable works, here. If you have another problem, ask a question. We will try to help you. That's how I would like this to work.
We used this to build. We used Airtable to build an e-commerce thing for Pages with Snipcart.
okay.
Whoever wants to go and eat can go. Otherwise, whoever wants to eat can walk.
First, a round of applause.